So here we have Leo, founder of YumBug. YumBug, one of the biggest brands in the insect food market in the UK. Leo, you're a bold man.
Thank you.
How many people do we know who have set up such a kind of trailblazing business in such a new space? Can you unpack that for us? How are you so bold and brave?
I've had no choice, Arthur. I've had no choice. I've been forced into a corner. I joke, but there is an element of truth in it, in the sense that I was a very disgruntled architect. I never qualified, so I can't really say that, but I was an aspiring architect, and frankly realised that it wasn't the path for me. So it was the certainty of climbing a ladder I knew I didn't want to be on versus doing something else. And I think I was very lucky in that I got into architecture originally knowing what I wanted to use architecture for. So I saw inherently architecture as a tool rather than a thing to go after in and of itself, which was very important because it meant that I could look at what I was doing within architecture and saying whether that was moving on my goals or not. To give some colour to what that means.
Yeah.
Actually, I spoke to this dude yesterday after 15 years since we had a first conversation that changed my life. I left school, had no idea what I was going to do, and I was looking at going to the army. Loved the idea of hanging out with lads and like firing guns. Then there was a tradesman, so I did my plumbing course and was looking at that as a route. And there was all these university courses from international relations to economics to, I just had no idea what I was doing basically. And this guy was like, look, do you want to go to the pub? And I was like, why? And basically in that sort of half an hour conversation, sipping a J2O, we ended up mapping the things that fascinated me, that I'd never been formalized and written down before, and uncovering themes that I was interested in. So the things that sort of, the three themes that sort of came out of that was design. So I love working with my hands. As a kid, I loved sort of model making and building things. Then there was the environment. I was just fascinated by how do you move the environmental issues forward, and people. I'd grown up in 13 different countries, mostly developing countries. I was born in Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Bangladesh, all these places, countries in Africa. And so how do you help people? That was just part of my psyche. And then that was really helpful because it focused the question as to what's going to help me deliver on these things. And that immediately meant being a plumber wasn't relevant. It meant going into the army probably wasn't great for my environmental thing. I might be having fun, but I've committed to wanting to move the environmental thing forward. And architecture came out as a sort of intersection of all of these things. I rewrote all my uni applications. It was all architecturally focused, and I ended up within architecture taking a more sort of urban route. And I realised this is very much a tangent, but that was because I wanted to have sort of the maximum impact on these questions as possible. And throughout my sort of brief architectural career, working in different kinds of practices, that was the inherent measure of, am I moving the needle on the environment or social issues? That actually gave me the confidence to say, this isn't right for me. This isn't the tool that I'm going to be best able to employ to affect those things. So to answer your question about being bold and brave is a consequence, a sequence of things that has led me to land on insects, really. And I should say at a similar time, so this was 2018, when I left architecture, Tesla was the #1 car in the world. And that was very inspiring because it wasn't the world's best electric car. It was the world's best car. And I was like, wow, you can really align a social good from first principles, that something that the world needs. We need to get off gasoline, and here was a solution that aligned with the business model and doing good in the world. And there are millions of these problems. I just needed to pick one. And that's where sort of bugs came up. It's an unsolved issue. As I say, I've grown up in all these countries. Over 80% eat insects. So we love prawns in the West. Why can't we be eating this? So I felt, it's weird to say, it's not the #1 problem that I care about. There are others, but I think what's been really important for me is just to commit, because commitment has allowed me to remove distraction and say, plumbing isn't right, the army isn't right, dilly-dally isn't right, I'm doing bugs. As a result of all of these things, I've ended up on this crusade to take bugs mainstream, which I'm very much still on.
water goal. We're very aware of the negative impact on the environment that eating meat has. And you must have met people who've done very well in the space of pushing the world to more of a sustainable place.
I've certainly met a lot of people who are working on it, varying degrees of success. The guy that's been the most influential for me is Musk. He's gone absolutely AWOL now. It's quite sad, actually, because personally how much of a sort of inspiration he was, that you can really build these amazing businesses that move society forward and give people hope and inspiration, think beyond themselves. But I'm very lucky in the sense that we're in London. I think one of the best places on earth to interact with great entrepreneurs. A lot of my friends are entrepreneurs. There's an optimism being an entrepreneur. There's a can-do attitude. There's a sense that the world can be better, and that's a necessary starting point to actually go and do something about it.
And the environment, because some people really care, they make it part of their lives, they think consciously about what they do and how that impacts the environment. How did you come to caring about it?
It's a great question, and I don't fully know the answer, but in retrospect, working backwards, I think the first time it struck me was watching Al Gore's film. What do you remember what it was called? I'm blanking. Al Gore, oh God, I'll remember in a few minutes. But so the vice president of the almost president, right? Al Gore became champion for the environment, and he produced this film in 2004 about climate change, and this is the last chance we have to save the environment and society in an existential sense. And obviously over-egging it maybe to some degree, that's what critics would say, but that sort of really struck me and stuck with me. Like, we've got to do something about this problem. We're designing and building civilization to be incompatible with our planet, and that's a design choice. It doesn't have to be, it's not inevitable, right? We've just built stuff wrong. So how do we fix that? Obviously I wasn't thinking this as a 10-year-old or whatever. I was thinking it's really sad that we're killing the polar bears and we don't have to. But I think that's quite important. We don't have to. We can make different choices. And politically, it's actually quite sad that it's been a zero-sum thing. It's totally not. There's a great book, Cradle to Cradle, all about how these design decisions that we make, and we can build products that are beneficial to the environment. We can build cities that are good for biodiversity, that solve the housing crisis. So why don't we?
Super interesting. And change, getting people to change their behavior. We were talking earlier about how can you lower the barriers to doing something, testing something out. Talk to us about the journey of YumBug.
This is, to some degree, as you've heard, this is a bit of a stumble upon. I didn't start out my career thinking I'm going to be taking bugs mainstream, but you've heard a bit of the backstory there. This is really a lockdown baby, and a mixture of all those things personally happening at the same time, looking way out of architecture. But my co-founder at the time, Aaron, who's now left, really because he became vegan. So when we first worked on this, he wasn't vegan, and one of our slogans is better meat because it's a meat. He's an entomologist by background, an insect scientist. I was at the time working with food brands, and we just had this fascination about why aren't we eating this perfectly good food in the West? As I say, 80% of countries, over 80% eats insects. And just fascinated by this question of what we accept as okay, as acceptable, and cultural norms that are totally made up, which food is. It's actually quite nuts how ingrained it is in people's understanding of truth. When you poke at saying, actually, this cheese could go with this, they're like, no, it can't. Why not? If you go somewhere else, that's exactly the pairing. We just learn that things are the way they are, but it's cultural. These are stories we tell ourselves about what's okay. A prawn is perfectly fine to eat, but you can't eat crickets. You can't eat land prawns. You can only eat sea prawns. Why? There's no good answer. That's the inception of the fascination. Why can't we be eating this food that is better for us? This is the most nutritious protein on earth. so much better for the environment. You're looking at 2,000 times less CO2, 2,000. A kilo of beef, a kilo of owl crickets, 2,000 times less CO2. And it tastes great. There's a reason all these countries eat insects, not because they have to. People are actively thinking, I want crickets for tea, when they can have pork and all this other stuff. Why? Because it tastes good. That was the inception of the fascination. Obviously, insects haven't ever really been mainstream in the West. We've got some sort of ideas and theories around why that is. Really, because insects to more temperate climates are always associated with like death and feces. Whereas if you go to warmer places, so the imagery and the association in the West and in colder places is you only see it in disgusting places. Whereas in warmer countries, you'll see like a beautiful grasshopper in a field. If you go to Japan, like it's actually quite a beautiful thing, like a caterpillar. And you don't look at that and think disgusting. Whereas you look at a maggot crawling out of someone's eyeball, like a corpse, and like, that's disgusting, so I'm not going to eat that. I think that's probably where that cultural sort of narrative started.
Talk to us about the benefits.
The reason I'm in this is for sustainability. It's got, as I say, produces 2,000 times less CO2. You're looking at about 20 times less land per kilo of meat produced, a fraction of the water. That's sort of 5,000 times less water than traditional meat farming. They're the most efficient converters of feed to meat in the world. So the amount of feed that you give to the animal, it's almost 1-to-1 with insects. It's like 1.2 kilos to 1 kilo of product, whereas you're looking at over 10-to-1 for some of these other animals. So 10 kilos of feed produces 1 kilo of meat.
What your goal is to be, pushing people to have far more crickets to be eaten. That's quite a complex challenge and opportunity. Are there experiments that you have in the pipeline on trying to push that onto the agenda? Right now you sell them to restaurants, they can be in tacos. Have you experimented with snacks or having it as a supplement, for example? Are there some experiments you have up your sleeve that you feel are exciting?
The whole thing has been an experiment.
Yeah.
I think that's important to say. We're getting answers as to what we need to do to take this mainstream. And that's taken years, frankly. We started this in 2021, went full time 2022. So it's been 4 years since really having a go at this, of understanding this question of what's going to take bugs mainstream. And we're still testing. In terms of what's exciting, this whole sort of go-to-market strategy has been centered around how do you convert someone? Because we're simultaneously creating a market whilst trying to supply it, right? Whilst trying to sell into it. You create a market by making people think they want to eat bugs, right? And so how does that happen? The thesis has been centered around delivering great first experiences, because we've very well tested that once you deliver a delicious plate of food, people are very quick to shift their mindset around crickets specifically. Some of these other insects are harder, like mealworms. Anything wormy people don't like as much. So how do you deliver these good first experiences? And restaurants are a really good way to do that because it's consistent. People are out for fun, so it's an additional story, a fun thing, especially if you're a few drinks in. So the last 18-24 months has been focused on making food service work. The challenge that we've run into is we're still sidelined as a novelty. And as much as we're getting mainstay listings, but it's not enough, frankly, because most of these listings are specials. So we're on for a summer. And really what we need as a business, we're not a bug charity. We're not just creating this awareness for nothing. We need recurring revenue. So the question has shifted slightly from how do you deliver these good first experiences to how do you get people to eat this regularly? And frankly, being a novelty in a restaurant isn't a great way to do that. So we're pulling back from the restaurant strategy and thinking about what is a product that people can use at home, still delivers a good experience, but we're really solving for what is this 10 out of 10 retail product. Okay,
so back into the consumer.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So that's where sort of all the excitement is now, is what does that product look like?
Yeah.
We've got ideas. So what we've got here is a mince that people can cook with, but there are ideas around, do we make this into a meat sauce, like a chili con carne that people can cook up themselves? What is the packaging? How do we talk about it on pack to maximize rate of sale? Certain things like, can we make this ambient stable? Where is it being positioned is it frozen? Is it chilled? Is it like in a jar and in an ambient stable shelf?
So many kind of things to work out. So consumer perception is a fascinating one, and how, for me, an interesting idea, think about it, is sometimes a really small change in product or messaging can just lead a business from heading towards failure to hitting enormous success. There was an example of a make your own cake package sold in retail, and it wasn't doing well at all. They had all the ingredients, all you needed to do is add water, and they just weren't selling anything. They decided to take out certain ingredients that meant that people would have to add a few eggs at home, and suddenly overnight this business just massively took off. Can you think of businesses that are similar to that, where they've just been messaging, putting out one message behind the product on why people should buy that product, and that shift has created success?
The one that's obvious, just because I've become quite close to the team, is Mouse. They've got quite an interesting sort of brand story. Their inflection point was content in showing the performance of the cases of their products. I don't know if you've seen the videos, but they throw the phones up in the air super high, or they drop it from hot air balloons and helicopters and actually from space.
Yeah,
they sent the phone up, and the phones survive. And that was the inflection point in their business, because those videos performed so well, they suddenly had a mechanic that worked. It meant that when they showed people that video and just added a shop now button under it, they would make sales, and it was profitable. It was very much an inflection point. Before then, there wasn't profitability on a unit economics basis or lifetime value acquisition cost basis. But after that, and they're still doing it, they're still chucking stuff out from like these really insane heights, and stuff survives. They've built their entire brand around performance, because that seems to be what drives them as a brand and what people are interested in. Yeah. And it's interesting, sort of that relationship between marketing, like the messaging that's landing, and then what they're then doubling down on as a brand. Yeah. We're very much pre that step, and we're not weirdly thinking too much about scale right now. The thing that I'm trying to get right is actually very small scale. Like, frankly, what we're trying to do is drive a really good rate of sale in a handful of targeted shops. So on a shop unit economic basis, we're doing very well. We understand what the playbook is. Can we work in an organic shop in Islington? Because if we can't work in a Tesco in Barnsley, where the average person has no idea about what this is, so can we make it work in very targeted retail locations, get this to a 10 out of 10 product? We're quite confident that people love it. Just some sort of numbers there. We're selling like a pack every 5 minutes.
Really?
Which like blew my mind. Yeah. And I get chased down by customers every day wanting more, because how we started was setting up in a guerrilla style in gyms. We went to like our local Pure gym, and we've got a really high protein product. Can we give some out to your customers? And the managers, yeah, great. Because they've been told by head office that they need to get some activations going at the Pure gym. So we set up this fold out table, and we just start selling them in the gym. Not allowed, but that's what we did. And it was just insane. Like once people were trying these samples, just how we just sold out, like within half an hour or something.
It's kind of what you've done there, because a big value add that you push is the amount of protein in the product, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then what's the analogy around startups? So if if you build products that people quite like to have, it's going to be a difficult path. But if you build a product that people need and quite literally puts out fires, then suddenly it's a whole different game.
Yeah.
So you've gone straight to people who are desperate. There's people who are desperate for that protein, and they want practically. Yes. They don't want to be eating huge quantities to achieve that protein goal.
Yeah, are you a vitamin or are you a painkiller? And for the longest time we weren't sure And it's actually quite interesting that, because we've also tested in what we call spit and sawdust gyms, proper bodybuilders like powerlifters.
Yeah.
They're not interested is because they've got a solution. They're like, I already prepped my chicken breast. The people who are interested are the young professionals who I've made a New Year's resolution to start going to the gym and I've signed up for High Rocks. What we have been doing is popping up in these gyms. And this is why they're all chasing me down.
Yeah.
So all of these guys who've had one, I'd had one literally before walking in here. People are like, my number must be somewhere, but I'm getting WhatsApps from all these gym people who found us in their local gym somehow one time. And they're like, how the fuck can I get another? And that's been just amazing because as an indicator for product market fit, I walked into an office, this is the first time it's ever happened, 6 weeks ago, and 3 people were eating YumBug for lunch, separate. They didn't know each other. And I was like, this is nuts. Because I'd never seen the product out in the wild before. That was in Shoreditch in a co-working space, so super targeted. But as a leading indicator for do people like the product, is their product market fit? That's just been insane. As I say, what we need to get work is, can this sit on a shelf and work? And we don't have answers to that yet. So April is when we'll be on shelf. So this is out by April. Nourished communities is where you can get it.
One thing that is a real kind of clear takeaway about your business and you as a person, you're amazing at marketing. And with your presence on social media, you've got some really big hitters to back your business. Talk to us about that, because raising money is, as everyone knows, is incredibly difficult. And the fact that you've got these highly successful people to back you, talk to us about that and what that's meant for you.
Yeah. What can I say about fundraising? It's such a networking game. It's the hardest, coldest sales outreach ever at the start, right? Yeah. But it really just started, we didn't know anyone. In lockdown, it was just us in a bedroom with an idea. Yeah. And we just started reaching out to people with, I should say, I think decent enough pictures in like a line or two. That was maybe like the key unlock. A lot of people love sending like TLDRs. We sent like a couple of lines. We're taking bugs mainstream, going to be a massive market. Do you want to chat?
Yeah. Sorry for bugging you.
Yeah, there might have been a pun. There was certainly a pun in there. But that was enough of a hook for enough people. And when I say enough, there was one key person, Giles Brand, shout out to Giles, who's founder of Epic Private Equity. And he has an angel syndicate with the Virgin lot. So he put us in touch with Holly Branson, Freddie, who's Holly's husband. And they came in as the first cornerstone investors. We had nothing. We had Prue Leith, who cooked up some of our recipes in lockdown, and that was all fun. But other than Prue talking about bugs and holding up our sort of recipe box, they were like the first real sort of backers of the idea. And since then, it's just been the networking thing and taking opportunities when you see it. And that actually, as a muscle to build, I would say it's the highest ROI thing ever, literally ever. Like whenever you see someone, you might recognize, and you like, so easy to be like, no, it's not really them. But I always go up and be like, oh, are you so-and-so? And like start to have a conversation with them, even in the office space. So maximize the water cooler moment. Be like, what do you do? And it's moments like that that you end up meeting people. But I think too many people are too scared to just say hi and have a conversation.
It's funny because you talked earlier about how certain moments sometimes it's moments you don't expect just change your world. Drink was over, a J2O.
Yeah.
A drink that we perhaps come across less now than 10 years ago. But can you think of some moments where you've been with someone really successful? I think Brewdog did this kind of...
James not invested. I'm not on very good terms with him at the moment though. I've been told off with him by him like loads. Yeah. And basically the issue is, and totally like fairly, is that like he's interested in us generating revenue. He wants us to scale this. Yeah. And I totally understand that. My number one thing is how do we generate loads, how do we take bugs mainstream? Like in order to do that, we need to sell. But I think there's disconnect and misalignment on the strategy, which has meant that he's lost interest.
But the moments with other entrepreneurs that you've met, or it could even be a colleague, a member of the team, where have there been moments of just advice you've been given, you've been like, wow, that's made me view things in a very different way, and change your action, or you're suddenly whipping out your phone to write some stuff down?
Every week, and that could come, like this weekend it came from my wife. But I think from like a strategic perspective, someone who's been very important for us is James Griffiths, another James from Mouse. We met actually on the James Watt thing. We were on the next unicorn. We met on the plane to Vegas because James flew out all the finalists for that. And James has been awesome at just on the weekends and stuff, chatting through ideas and next steps. And he's been quite instrumental actually in how I thought about YumBug. And to give you a concrete example, actually both Jameses, James Watt, suggested that we open a bug restaurant. I thought it was a terrible idea at the time. James Griffiths also doubled down on that. I was like, actually, that could be a really good idea. So both of them were championing this idea of opening a restaurant, and the pop-ups were just insane for us. Depends what you measure, because it wasn't a profitable business, but for credibility around insects, for PR, 100 million impressions in the press, every breakfast show, front page Guardian, it was just insane. Completely sold out, thousands and thousands on the waiting list. It was just nuts. We still weren't profitable. Restaurants are hard, but that was something that they both championed for. And JG since has been, as I say, like quite a close advisor. And to be like candid, when Aaron, my co-founder, left, it was quite sort of an existential crisis for me. It was the person who you've been building this business with is leaving. So what do I do? And we weren't profitable at that time. And there's a whole load of challenges ahead. So it was a decision-making point. Do I keep going, or do I fold up and essentially give people the excuse that Aaron's left, so I'm going to leave too? And we gave it a good shot, but we weren't profitable, not profitable yet. But JG, like essentially on the other end of the phone, was like, is this what the laws of physics are saying, or are you just being lazy? The challenge there was margins, because margins right now are shit, because we don't have economies of scale. We need some serious capex to go into the manufacturing and supply chain. So he was talking from a margins perspective. Does the laws of physics say that you can't produce this product at good unit economics, or are you just being lazy? And I was like, oh, I'm just being lazy, so I'm going to crack on. It was as simple as that. And in moments like that, he's been absolutely pivotal. And I wouldn't be sat here, and I wouldn't have recommitted to this whole challenge without that conversation.
A really interesting point that you made, just the concept of how we often end up doing well really through other people's help, through learning about other people's journey, through people encouraging us on the journey. How do you support others on that? Because so much about what you do is around solving a problem. We talk about the environment and really contributing.
It's interesting you asked me that, because I actually think that the thing that I'm most interested in is helping people be their best selves. And another way of saying that is fulfilling their own goals. I think what's amazing about teams in a very philosophical sense is that they help people do their best work and realize their dreams. If YumBug can do that for people, amazing. And that, I think also selfishly, that's how the best functioning teams are. Everyone's there because they believe in it and because it's helping them be the person they want to be. So I've always strived, and I think to a fault actually, the company's mission, so I'm rowing back on it a little bit, but try to create an environment where that's the case. And I think, but where it has become problematic is when I'm hoping, and almost to a point where I'm imposing that. When you're in an interview and you're like, is this what do you actually want? People will tell you anything, and even when they're an employee. But when it actually comes down to the wire and we need to perform as a team, are people showing up in a way that matches what they're saying? I think I've over-indexed on believing them versus watching how they show up, if that makes sense. Like, you're saying that you really care about this, but we've not got the work done. So what actually matters in an ideal, so actually the issue there is me, because that was bad hiring. But I would love for this to be a vehicle for people to realize their dreams, whether that's at YumBug or not. Yeah. This can totally be a stepping stone. But if you're coming in and we're pulling and we're a world-class team going for gold, this is like part of my spiel that certainly people have hated, is we've got to think like an Olympic team. We have to be world-class. This is the hardest thing in food right now. And we're a handful of people and we have to be extraordinary. Otherwise this isn't going to happen. So can you show up like that?
So, being an entrepreneur, it's hardcore. What are you grateful for what it's taught you, and what does it lead you into thinking about the world? Maybe that's for you going forward, or...
Frankly, I'm grateful for everything. That sounds... I think we've got a weird view on success in the West. I think it's so, not in the world, but especially in the West, I think it's so individualistic. It's I am responsible for my own success. I'm responsible for this mindset that I've created for myself. No, you're not. Like, I didn't decide to want to start a business. I didn't decide to think the way that I do. It's not like an intentional decision. I can decide maybe to act on it, but I feel very lucky to, how I see it is to have experienced the things that I have, to be in the conditions and around the people I have been around that has caused me to want certain things. Yeah. And all I'm able to do is double click on that. I cannot double click on that, but there's a massive bias to wanting to do those things versus someone who hasn't experienced that. And I appreciate I'm talking at a high level here, and I think on a social level it's important that we recognise that. And I've committed, if this exits, I've committed 10% to Founders Pledge, which will give back, and I think that's the least I could do. I'm very privileged. This is privilege to be to be in these trenches. And I think that's actually a really important mindset. Also in the team, you've got to wake up in the trenches and believe it's another day in paradise and you're lucky to be there. You're lucky to be working at 2 a.m. on this amazing thing. It's not a cost. You've chosen to be here. So you can be here or you can be in an architecture practice. Yeah. This is paradise. And that's helped me go through some really tough times.
Tough times. If you met someone tomorrow and for a coffee and you saw they were in a difficult place, what are the things you would share to them? And you're not allowed to be British here. It's clean truths.
The first thing I certainly wouldn't do is start spouting feedback, and I would ask questions, really. I think it's very easy to go into problem solving mode, and the worst thing in the world, the absolute worst thing in the world, is low information, high conviction, which is most people most of the time when they're giving feedback. So much conviction around you don't really understand the situation. So how do you get to a position of high information, low conviction, or appropriate conviction? And you do that through asking questions. What's the problem? How do you see the situation? What are the options? Just having a conversation, but trying to ask as many questions as possible and I think the headspace there is curiosity. Do I really understand what's going on here? And absolutely there is a place to say a piece, but I think there's also a risk of unsolicited advice. Yeah. So a question on, are you open for me to share what I think? Yeah. Just something like that. And these are the fundamental building blocks of coaching, right? Just helping people work through their problems. And the best possible outcome is they come to a solution themselves because you've asked a really good question. It could be a priority issue. I've got this going on, but I don't really know what to do because I want to do this, but this is a really good opportunity. As an example of a kind of problem. So, okay, how do we work through that? What are your goals? Yeah. You can structure a conversation to help them understand what their priorities are. And you almost don't need to give them an answer. So it will depend totally on what the problem is that they're facing.
You talked about being in the trenches, but part of being in the trenches is other people who are in the trenches. What should those that are curious about the food space, the sustainability space, what should we be reading? What's exciting at the moment?
There's so much going on. To be honest, I'm not a great person to ask for information because I've completely upended my information diet. I used to think that it's about knowledge acquisition. And I think there's a degree of truth in that. So I used to spend a lot of time consuming stuff, reading all the articles that I could. But what I've come to realize is, it's almost like your question about the notebook, is this helping solve the problem that I need to solve? And oftentimes it wasn't, it was a distraction. I was labeling reading as useful, but actually I just needed to often just execute on stuff rather than consuming content. So I've completely upended, got rid of the news and all that sort of stuff. There's nothing I can be doing about the war in Ukraine in my position right now to understand that there are way smarter people dealing with all these issues. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that my focus right now is on answering the questions that I know we need to answer, getting rid of everything else, and actually swapping, the key thing for me is actually swapping what used to be podcasting time for networking time. There is totally, I must emphasize, there is totally a role for listening to podcasts, to reading and knowledge acquisition. But I think you need to know all that you need to know to be able to do the stuff you need to do. And beyond that, it becomes like entertainment. It's no longer useful.
A lot to focus on. We're going to move now to the quickfire questions. 3 things that bring you joy.
3 things: meeting new people, swimming in the ponds on the weekend, Hampstead Heath, going to the gym is my sort of, or run, like it's my zen space.
A mantra that you want to communicate about today?
The one that really shifted things for me is the belief that I'm in control of my outcomes. And at 16, I got this tattooed on my foot. So this was a massive inflection point in my life. It was success as a choice. For everything that we've just spoken about, am I responsible for this way of thinking and the things that I want? Not necessarily. So it's not I think there's massive caveats in that. But I think as the first thing to believe to make your situation and the world better, you've got to believe you've got agency and have control. So it's still important for me. Yeah. I can decide to go to the gym or to go out for a burger. I get to choose. And putting that responsibility on you, and me personally, has been so important to realizing that just being clear on what my goals are. Because success is a choice. Like, what is success? It's achieving your goals. And I get to choose that. As much as all of this stuff, as I keep reiterating, I wouldn't say came from me. It was just like an amalgamation of things that I've experienced and been exposed to. But yeah, if that can help anyone listening, then go for it. Go find your success.
Best advice you've ever been given from someone?
I think it's probably this guy who helped me understand what I cared about. But I think the moral of the story there was just understand your goals. I think so many people are optimizing for things they don't really understand where it's going. They're making decisions, not really understanding what's important. And the only way, because there are no inherent rights or wrongs. What is a right decision versus a wrong decision? It has to be against a goal. Are you going over there or over there? There's no right answer. But to know whether that way or that way is right, you've got to understand where the end point is. And so many people don't do that because it's hard. It's hard to commit to say, I actually want to go over there, because that means I'm not going there. Yeah. And that's really what that J2O conversation did. It's like, what are your goals? And that's been the question that has allowed me to commit to shit, to say, I'm doing bugs. I'm going over there. So I'm saying no to 6-figure salaries and all the rest of it. But like such nice opportunities. Yeah. I still get offers, but I'm taking bugs mainstream. So I'm going to be eating ramen and living off no salary because that's where I'm going.
Self-empathy, what does that mean to you?
I mean, it's been quite a tricky one to really get my head around. But how it shows up in my life is balance. Balance looks different for everyone, but balance for me is, am I doing, I don't know if you read Atomic Habits, James Clear, great book. The question he asks is, what are the most upstream things that means that everything else downstream increases its chance of success? So as an example, for me, if I get my gym in that day, I'm clear-headed, everything else works. I sleep better. So self-empathy is creating space for the things that matter, like catching up with my wife, hanging out with friends on the weekend. That balance has meant I can run this marathon and not tire.
Speaking of eating things, we've got something to eat here, which is your delicious product. My goodness. So all the way from, where does it come from this morning?
Just up the road.
Oh. Delicious, delicious.
Thank you.
I have to say, I thought to myself before this, whatever the answer is going to be quite polite. I didn't expect it to genuinely be so good. Congratulations, wow.
Thanks very much.
Tomato? Talk to us about the ingredients. So right now I'm eating, how do you describe it?
It's a chili con carne.
Chili con carne.
Made with YumBug mince. So it's a cricket mince. It's a very clean label. It's made of crickets, flour, whole wheat flour and salt. It's over 85% cricket, very clean. This is all natural. A lot of people obviously are quite concerned about sort of ultra processed foods in these meat alternatives. This isn't a meat alternative as such because it is meat. One of our taglines is better meat. And it's been very important for us to keep the crickets natural, not try to make it beef. So it's not going to bleed. We're not going to add science to it to make it do the things that normal beef would do.
Yeah.
So what you're really trying is the minced up crickets.
That's delicious.
Fantastic.